Hi, this is Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the NPA Report. I have with me a man today that I have known and known of for quite a long time, and he is an incredibly brave man, not just because he was a police officer for over 3 decades, but because he chose to protect those who protected the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we're going to talk about what that was like and some of the things that he was involved in. Lieutenant Bob Kroll, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Betsy, and thanks for that nice introduction.
Hey, so you were a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and people have this really wrong idea about Minneapolis PD. So I want to first talk about that. I've been a police trainer for a number of decades. I've trained up there many times. And the thing that people don't know about the Minneapolis, Minnesota Police Department is for decades, you have had the reputation of being one of the best educated, best trained, most progressive and professional police departments in this country. Talk about that.
I remember early on when I was graduating from high school, I had to go for a 2-year degree, which Minnesota and California at that time, Betsy, were the only 2 states in the country that I was aware of that had to have that requirement. So they were educated better starting off, and we've always, done a very good job with training here. There's a good program that since then a lot of other states have followed. You got your 2-year degree, and then you went to a skills course, then you got academy training. So yes, you're right. We were very highly trained in the state for many, many years, all of my time in law enforcement. And you find that when, getting around the country, you find that, yeah, we do have a very good department in Minneapolis.
So you started on the job in the late 80s, as like everybody else does, as a patrol officer. And but you start to become involved in your police union, the Federation. Why did you want to get involved in that?
Well, I grew up, my dad was a union guy, he was a union electrician, and I grew up around union people the whole time. And I immediately always went to my meetings prior to being elected on the board. And I had about 6 years on, and there was a vacancy. And I ran as one of our directors. There's 10 people on the board, 5 of them are directors. I was a director for, 9 to 10 years. Then I ran for vice president. I was a vice president for 9 to 10 years. And then my final term, I was elected to president for the last 6 years. They're on 2-year terms. And most often I was white balloted by the membership, didn't have races or elections. And our federation represents everybody on the job, with the exception of like the top 20 appointed people. So all of our ranks of officer, sergeant, lieutenant, were in one union. And I enjoyed what I did there, and I stayed on the board.
So there is a huge misconception in this country that police unions exist solely to keep bad cops on the job. Tell people why that's not true.
Well, it's not true, because what's not talked about is the cases of legitimate officers doing things wrong. When the Federation looks into it and realizes, yeah, they're guilty of this, we don't grieve a lot of cases. The officers take the discipline given to them, up to and including termination. And what's not talked about is those cases that we review where the officer is wrong, did something wrong, and we don't grieve it. You only hear about the ones where we challenge a case and they go to arbitration, and oftentimes the merits are not there that warrant discipline. And that's why we do what we do in the disciplinary grievance process.
Because cops do make mistakes, right? We are human.
Come from the human race.
Yeah, exactly. I have taken a day or 2 off without pay for things, and in my 29-year career, and that happens right now. I don't want to make this political, but I just have to say that the political left tends to really like unions, don't they? Until it comes to our profession.
That's interesting you bring that up, because one of the things that kind of thrust me into the limelight, for 50 years, the city of Minneapolis has been pretty much Democrat controlled the whole time with regard to city council. And many years, the Police Federation endorsed those candidates, and they wore their uniforms at public appearances and in promotional ads and things. And that was enjoyed, and the Democrats reaped the benefits from that. Well, as years went by, we realized that maybe the Democrats weren't representing our best interest, and we started endorsing Republican candidates on a national level, state level, city level. And they went ahead and changed the policy that, hey, you can't wear your uniform anymore. And they did it coincidentally on a president from Donald Trump. So they have enjoyed our endorsement for many years. And we decided, hey, when we realized they're not supporting police officers anymore, why should we support them? They changed the rules of the game and wouldn't. And so that's a side note. But when we were prohibited from wearing our uniforms, I created the Cops for Trump t-shirts, and I had the opportunity to talk with and meet the president. So I automatically became a bad guy, you know.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Everybody associates Minneapolis PD with the George Floyd case, which is completely unfair. But you were involved in some other cases prior to that in your role with the Federation. And
Yes.
I want to talk about that because in 2014, America was polarized by the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri. And that began what we at the National Police Association and a lot of other entities call the war on cops, where we had a very anti-police president in President Obama. He was an anti-police senator in my state of Illinois when I was still a police officer. And as soon as he became president, he started to go after the American law enforcement officer. And then he found an opportunity with the Michael Brown case to really go after us. And that bled over into lots of other police agencies, including in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right, with a couple of cases you guys had to deal with.
Right. And you summarized the Obama administration very well in that there did become a war on cops. And I got elected to president in 2015, shortly after the Ferguson incident. And we had our own one called, it was Jamar Clark here. And there have been several since. But there was a false narrative out there that our officers handcuffed, laid down, and shot and killed Jamar Clark, which was completely untrue. No one, of course, would sign their name to a statement stating that, but that was the narrative that was captured in the media and ran with. And I was very vocal standing up for our officers saying, no, the investigation will reveal that they did nothing wrong and their actions were lawful and proper. And the end result, that's exactly what occurred. It didn't stop the media and the left from villainizing me, though. I
have to ask, because again, MPD, you had very progressive chiefs. This MPD was hardly the face of white supremacy. Let me just say that, and male white supremacy. I mean, you just weren't. You had various chiefs, open lesbian chief. You had, African-American chief, all that. Why do you think you guys were so in the crosshairs politically? You bring up an interesting point, and it's well documented that the only thing underrepresented in our promoted ranks in the Minneapolis Police Department were the white males. I mean, we're a very diverse department, and a lot of that diversity held rank in powerful positions in the department. So that's an interesting point. But the community in Minneapolis is very, very progressive left, and it just seems like it's never enough. And for whatever reason, the heterosexual white males are the villains in this town. We did have a wealth of diversity, and we did get along within the ranks too. I got along well with the chiefs of police that I negotiated labor agreements with, and there was this false narrative that the MPD is these big bad wolves, and it's a bunch of rogue white cops, and it couldn't be further from the truth. You're absolutely right. And let me ask you, just as a law enforcement expert, does your skin color, Bob, or your sexuality affect your job as a police officer? Not a bit. And there's a thing that I always point to, that you're stopping that car because, and you can throw in the race or sex. And the realization is half your hours are working in the dark. And I always say, well, tell me the race of that vehicle in front of you, who's driving what. You can never see. And you being a cop know that, but
The general public doesn't get that. I'm okay. Next time you're driving down the road, tell me the race of the driver in front of you at night, and you can't. So that it's again, it's a false narrative that's pushed for whatever reason, and it's strange. But I can't put a finger on why they want to do that.
Right. So at some point, you married your local CBS anchor. Your wife, Liz Collin, is she's just a gem. Let me just say that. And she's been a guest on my show. And you guys got married, and it was great, right? I mean, nobody cared that you were married to a journalist, and nobody seemed to care that she was married to a cop, right? Until 2020.
Right. It was a non-issue, and I think the thing that really put that in the spotlight, we kept our professional lives completely separate, and it wasn't well known. When President Trump came to town during a re-election campaign, I had an opportunity to go on stage and meet him, and then it became very polarized. And they made the association with Liz and I being married. We got our 5-year anniversary in a few days here, but it was never an issue until politics kind of got injected into our lives. And then, all the labeling they did for President Trump just spilled over onto me, and then unfortunately spilled over onto her. And it ended up being the demise of her career with the CBS affiliate here in Minneapolis.
And President Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, was the most pro-law enforcement president, I think, Bob, in our lifetimes, right?
Absolutely. And as a side note, I had the opportunity to meet the man, one of the nicest men you would ever meet. Truly cared. The night that he was at a rally here in Minneapolis, not just him, not just his vice president, but everyone on his staff went out of their way to say how important law enforcement was to the president. And his policies reflected that.
And you're right. And I have heard this, my husband and I still travel around the country and train cops, and every police officer that we've ever talked to who was part of a presidential or a campaign detail when Donald Trump was in their jurisdiction says the exact same thing, that he and his staff would go out of their way to thank the police officers, pose for pictures, say kind things about them like they've never seen before. And I've been on presidential details, and you have too, probably pre-Trump. And most presidents were nice, but we were kind of flies on the wall. They didn't really care about us. We were there to do a job, and that's fine. They were there to do a job too. But President Trump would wait forever to pose with every single police officer and every single agency. And of course that upset people. And I know here where I live in Tucson, Arizona, that upset the chief there. And all of a sudden you couldn't pose with political people in your uniform, things like that. And you ran into some similar things as well, right?
Yes, and you bet he did. And the key thing is cops have a pretty good judge of character on people, and you can tell he was sincere about it. That's the best part about it, was he was truly sincere, and we're all of the staff. When he came here for a rally at our Target Center, we were always allowed to wear the uniform for the Federation endorsed candidate. It was just a notification of the chief of police that we were going to appear in literature or a commercial or whatever, or a public appearance. And it was the Federation endorsed candidate, and we were going to wear it, and that was it. When President Trump planned to visit to our Target Center, first off, Mayor Frey tried to 5 times the fold of the cost of the Target Center to him. They wanted to multiply the usual rent for it by 5 times the value. Then he also said that the officers who we had endorsed President Trump were not allowed to wear their uniform. So our retort to that was we created a Red Cops for Trump t-shirt. And I had the opportunity to appear on Fox National News a couple of times on shows, and it took off, and it caught like wildfire. It actually made it to President Trump, who reached out and set up a meet with us when he was in town. And I was in essence called up on stage. I did opening remarks at the Target Center visit, and he called all of us up on stage, and it was re-election. And who's going to turn down an opportunity to meet a sitting president, particularly one that had such a love for law enforcement as Donald Trump?
And all of a sudden you're after that, you're the police face of white supremacy, basically, right?
Right, right. The false narrative, all the false narrative that they had on President Trump spilled over onto me. It's one and the same. And then unfortunately, my wife got caught up in that too. You know, if Donald Trump is a Hitler, that makes me a Hitler, and that makes my wife Ava Braun. It was just nonsense. But unfortunately, cancel culture was very powerful, and it played a part.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, as a part of that, obviously, you were involved in the George Floyd situation because, you know, you're the union, the federation president. So how did that impact your life and ultimately your wife's life?
Well, when that happened, it was Memorial Day. I got the call from Officer Tom Lane that, hey, you know, they thought we had an excited delirium case where a person either overdosed or something like that. We had it in custody, what could have been an in custody death the first time he called. Second time he called back and verified it was a in custody death. So as all of those cases, you go in and you meet with the officers, and the process works where we would always view the body camera footage, any other camera footage they had, whether it was dash cams, body cams, or stationary, and marry the officers up with our legal defense fund attorneys. It's a statewide program that all the unions are part of that have attorneys provided for the officers, and they take it from there. You just guide them through the process. You know, in a critical incident, you just let them know what's going to occur and guide them through the process. And that's the union's really only involvement. But if you would listen to the public here, you know, I was to bat for these guys, and you have very limited information because in an in custody death, they have an attorney provided for them, and they have the attorney-client privilege, and the union, in essence, is out of it from that point.
Right.
But that narrative did not get correctly portrayed by any means.
Right. I mean, you were just doing your job, and so was Liz. So following all that, and of course, then you had the riots, and the 3rd precinct was burned. I have a friend from MPD who was texting me that night real-time pictures of what was happening at the 3rd precinct. It was, I just didn't believe it was even happening. It was extraordinary. And then you and your wife, you got doxxed. Explain that. We've got a couple of minutes left. Explain what happened and how you came to write a book.
They basically, you know, Donald Trump was evil. I had to be evil. I was defending these racists. First of all, they made the George Floyd incident about race, which it never was. Race never even really came up in the trial and the conviction. And we had 2 sets of mixed race officers on there on the scene that are in prison currently. So race had nothing to do with it. It was a false narrative. The Federation had extremely little to do with it. We married them up with their attorney, and that's the end of it. But the riots were so mishandled, they needed a scapegoat. The city had a PR crisis management firm come in and said, hey, let's blame the union. You know, your president was aligned with Donald Trump, and that's just the narrative that went forth. The end result of it was they made, you know, the connection to my wife, and then they thought, well, the media is biased. We had protests at our home, protests at each of our workplaces, my union office, her WCCO, CBS affiliate station. We had 3 protests at our home. And you would think that we had everything to do with it. The reality is we had very little to do with any of this. And my wife had absolutely nothing to do with it. She was not reporting on crime at all at that time.
It is an extraordinary story, and it's, you guys outlined in the book. Do you have the book to show folks?
I do. It is, the book can be found at thelieexposed.com by Liz Collin. They're Lying: The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. So it's available on Amazon. It has been an Amazon bestseller. It was released not even 3 months ago, and it's been a bestseller. It's been doing great, but the truth is told from that book for sure.
And that's what I love about the book. That's what I love about you and Liz is she tells that story in the book from just one of the most unique perspectives any police wife can have. And I would strongly recommend anybody who's interested in the truth, go to that website, and then also, go to Amazon, buy that book, because it's just extraordinary. And you guys are two of the most resilient people I've ever seen when it comes to the false narrative that somehow American law enforcement is the problem.
True. From her perspective with the media and my perspective with the PD and the Federation, and having a front row seat of having handled so many critical incidents in the past and seeing the false spin, we just couldn't stand by and do nothing. And that's in Liz's skill set. So she took it and ran with it. And I'm very happy she did. And like I said, the book has been a great success. It's not about sides. The extreme left is taking this. I would challenge anybody that would, if you will, on the other side, take a read of the book and you realize, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. Tell us again, the website, where people can find you, where they can find Liz, and how they can buy the book.
It is thelieexposed.com, and it's authored by Liz Collin. They're Lying, the Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. Website's thelieexposed.com.
And it is one of the recommended readings in my own classes for law enforcement. And but I really want citizens to read this book and hear what you guys have to say. Lieutenant Bob Kroll, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out to talk to me this morning. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.